Order. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Joint Committee on Human Rights. This is the 41st meeting of this committee in this session. We've been joined by 3 expert witnesses today to help us with our inquiry into the regulation, if it's possible, of artificial intelligence and what we can do by way of recommendations to the government as they shape their policies and their approach to AI. We are a joint committee, so we're formed from both houses, 6 members of both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. We're drawn from diverse political traditions, and we try to bring our own experience in public and political life to the table. The thing that we share together is a passion for the rights of every citizen, for their human rights, their human dignity to be upheld. That's why we are here. So this is the 3rd public session of the AI inquiry since the call for evidence closed last September, and today members will explore the opportunities for embedding safety measures and mechanisms throughout the AI life cycle in a solutions-based focus. We've heard a lot about the dangers and the worries, but we want to know a little bit about what the solutions and the answers, if there are any, might be. The committee is going to hear from private sector organisations who say that they are working to ensure that AI is used in a safe and reliable manner which doesn't adversely affect human rights. And the panel is going to explore issues such as bias in data, transparency when AI is in use, how to explain AI purposes and outputs, and the challenge of accountability and responsibility for human rights harms when AI is applied or when it's used. And the committee is part of a broader, wider approach right across the parliamentary state, which is being undertaken by a range of other select committees in this area. For example, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is looking at disinformation diplomacy, how malign actors are seeking to undermine democracy. It's exploring the use of mis- and disinformation campaigns by state and non-state actors. The Women and Equalities Committee is investigating the influence of online misogyny, including deepfakes. The Home Affairs Committee has an inquiry on online extremism. The Treasury Select Committee is exploring the risks and benefits of AI in financial services, including bias and data sharing. And the House of Lords Communication and Digital Committee recently launched an inquiry into AI and copyright. So to explore these issues with us, we have Julian Serban, who's the Senior Director of Research and Development at Law Zero. We have Kay Firth Butterfield, who's CEO at Good Tech Advisory, and we have James Drayson, CEO of Loci Labs. You're very welcome, and we're very appreciative of your time with us today. It's generous of you to do that and to share your knowledge with us. Let me ask a curtain-raising question before I turn to the first of my colleagues, Mr. Alex Sobel, Member of Parliament. But let me ask each of you, if you'd say briefly what your organisation was founded to do, what functions it performs, what services it provides, and how you are funded. So let's start with Kay Firth Butterfield.
Certainly, thank you very much for inviting me to give evidence today. I was the world's first Chief AI Ethics Officer back in 2014, at a time when it was probably Stephen Hawking and a few of us thinking about these issues of our human future with AI. After leading work on AI and quantum at the World Economic Forum, I started my own company, which operates in many countries around the world, in 2023. I'm fortunate that more Fortune 500 companies, startups and charities than might be expected still choose to seek my help on implementing responsible AI, especially those companies that operate in countries where regulations on AI are changing, sporadic, or in fact non-existent. But you know, my heart lies in ensuring that AI is good for humans and that we make the right decisions about how to use it, whilst noting that as our working population decreases, we will need to rely more on AI in the workplace and in our elder care, which makes it even more critical to get the right oversight for humans now. Our services are thought leadership. I just released a new book on Monday of this week, education around the wise AI design, development and use of AI, by companies, countries, and I also sit on boards and advisory boards from startups to charities to Fortune 100 companies. I want everybody in the world to be engaging in this conversation, not just to have it in rooms like this. Our funding comes from those sources that I've mentioned, and I should say, for transparency, that I'm also an associate barrister at Doughty Street Chambers.
Thank you very much.
And I should declare that I'm a member.
We have our own barrister from Doughty Street Chambers, Baroness Kennedy, who will be asking some questions later on. Mr. Drayson, you're next.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is James Drayson, co-founder and CEO of Loci Labs, a foundational AI company based in Paddington, London. I should also declare that our chairman is a member of the House of Lords. Myself, I founded Loci Labs in 2022, shortly after graduating from Imperial College London. We're really grateful to the committee for focusing on this issue, and as a British citizen, I am deeply invested in the future of our country, our values, and our sovereignty in this digital age. We founded Loci Labs because artificial intelligence is becoming infrastructure. And once the technology becomes infrastructure, the question is no longer whether it shapes society, but who fundamentally controls it, whose values it encodes, and who it serves. If we don't build and steward our own AI systems, we will simply import the assumptions and blind spots of others, often shaped under very different cultural, legal, and economic conditions. At Loci Labs, we are building sovereign AI, foundational models developed right here in the UK, governed by UK laws and aligned with British values. We've created a consumer application called Loci, where you can access at loci.chat, L-O-C-A-I, which is our competitor to ChatGPT. But the reason why we built this product is not just because the UK needs sovereign AI, but also because we are fundamentally not happy with how AI is being done outside of the UK. Instead of focusing on post-training and building, we build responsibly on top of open source models. With just £1 million in funding to date, we've enhanced existing open source LLMs to deliver state-of-the-art performance aligned with British values. We've seen what happens when governments fail to shape technology early. The UK missed this chance to influence social media, and we're still living with the consequences today. With AI, we now have a second chance. But that demands collaboration between Parliament, regulators, industry, and civil society. Regulation is not an obstacle to innovation, it is an enabler of trust, and trust is the foundation of responsible AI. The UK has the talent, institutions, and values to lead, and we believe the UK government has a vital role to play in that.
Thank you very much. That's a very helpful curtain raiser. That issue around trust is something that the Select Committee is very concerned about itself. Dr. Servan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure, and thank you for doing this really important work. I've come here from Law Zero, where I recently joined as the new Senior Director of Research and Development. Law Zero is a non-profit founded by Professor Yoshua Bengio, who is the Turing Medal Award winner, one of the most cited, I believe the most cited scientist in the history of the world, and one of the godfathers, the pioneers of AI, who years ago helped invent and build the language models and attention mechanisms that now underpin transformer models that are the building blocks of large language models. Law Zero was founded very recently as an alternative way of building frontier AI systems. These current systems that we have today, what we call large language models from well-known companies such as OpenAI and Anthropic, are brittle black boxes that we don't fully understand. We don't understand how they behave. We can't predict what they will do. And we see over and over again that they don't behave the way we want them to. They're incredibly hard also to align and to control when we try to. And of course, they're opaque. We've seen concerning behaviors ranging from sycophancy, deception, scheming, power-seeking behavior, and a general misalignment with human values and goals. As James mentioned earlier, how can we align these systems with our goals? We see this over and over again in our work, and we believe at Law Zero that left unchecked, these systems pose a serious risk to our society, that could include catastrophic consequences, including the loss of human life, which we may already be seeing now. So for that reason, LawZero was founded. We're building, as I mentioned, a new type of frontier AI systems. The flagship system is the Scientist AI, inspired by what a good scientist should be. A good scientist should be impartial, disinterested, should care about understanding the world, but have no goals of their own outside of what it's instructed to do. And so taking these ideas, we're designing from first principles, the way a good engineer would build a bridge from first principles. We're building a new type of frontier AI system that will be safe and trustworthy from design, that has certain guarantees. We're just starting, and our very first application to come soon will be a guardrail that can be used by existing frontier models. You can put it on top of these models, and you can ensure that these less trusted models can now be trusted and are more aligned. And then as a next step, we'll take the Scientist AI, use it for a scientific advancement, and then, of course, as a frontier AI system. This is what we're doing at LawZero. We're a nonprofit, as I mentioned. Our funding comes from philanthropic donors based in the US, Canada, and elsewhere, as well as government grants. Some of it is available publicly. I can share more if needed. Personally, I did my PhD at the Mila Research Lab with Yoshua Bengio. I was a student of his 10 years ago. I published 20 research papers. I co-authored 2 books. I built a startup called Corbett that was an AI for education startup that trained 20,000 students, then built a second product in AI and cybersecurity, and then I joined LawZero.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from Mr. Sobel, and after that from Baroness Kennedy.
Julian, that was an absolutely fantastic introduction and speaks to my questions. So in terms of ensuring that we have these guardrails, particularly for the frontier systems, the new foundational models that are coming through, first of all, do you think that they will take into account human rights and our rights? Secondly, the ISO have published some standards for foundational models. What do you think about those? Are they fit for purpose? And secondly, obviously ISO standards are just voluntary. People can completely ignore them. How do you think that we need to think about legislating to ensure guardrails in the United Kingdom?
That's an excellent question. So there is a report from Yoshua Bengio and other 40 leading researchers in AI across different institutes and universities that is about to be published. I will share it with the committee, hopefully in the next few weeks once it's ready. But we identified 4 categories of risk that needs to be investigated for these systems and that guardrails need to manage. The first is the intentional misuse of AI systems. For example, if a user queries them to create disinformation or to create weapons that could hurt others. The second category of risk is the unintended AI system behavior. Like I mentioned earlier, when systems are lying, deceiving, they exhibit sycophancy. The third category, of course, is information risk, the leaking of private data, PII, or even the theft when people willingly, intentionally try to go in and extract private data by querying these models over and over. And the fourth category of risk we need to look at is the sort of emergent social phenomena, where these models, through repeated interactions over weeks and months, create a bond, an addiction between the user and the system, and even end up creating sort of unhealthy emotional bonds that might lead to, for example, self-harm and teenage suicide. These are the 4 risks, and I think all guardrails need to look at them and, of course, look at all the core human rights values that we have. They need to go in. I haven't answered what they're doing today. There are already guardrails that have been produced by these systems, and there are various other companies that are also working on it alongside us. I'm happy to go into that if you want to.
We've got a further question, but maybe the other two want to add anything to that.
And bear in mind, you'll have the chance also on subsequent questions to add anything that you're not able to say now. So, Ms. Firth Butterfield.
No, I don't have anything to add on that, apart from to say that I agree entirely with that at least those 4 things need good guardrails.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Drayson.
Yeah, and I would add to that I think it's the responsibility of the model providers and makers, and also those who make the decision to deploy it, to take the fundamental responsibility for what happens and do the work to fix it.
Thank you. Baroness Kennedy.
We've sort of divided up some of this so that we don't have you all having to answer the same sort of questions. So I'm addressing this to you, Mr. Drayson, and you mentioned that your father was, well, you didn't mention your father, you mentioned that your chairman is a member of the House of Lords, but he is indeed your father, and he's known to some of us. Mr. Drayson, I wanted to ask you about what technical and organisational measures should be in place, in your view, before AI applications are actually deployed in order to make sure that they don't interfere with human rights once they're in use. I mean, to what extent is there sort of an examination of the risks of human rights abuses?
Fundamentally, we don't yet know, especially when it comes to these very general foundational models, what all of the risks are going to be. The first part is obviously depending on what the use cases are, do the necessary work to understand that. But I think it is a balance between both already knowing all of the risks versus anticipating where it could come from. So as an example, with our consumer application, we have purposefully made the decision to not roll it out to those under the age of 18. Now, that is not a part of regulation at the moment, but it is our responsibility of what we believe is right, knowing what these fundamental things are capable of. With a generative model, they are probabilistic systems. It is all based on probability and therefore not 100% safe. That is why you get different answers when you ask the same model the same question. And so we are really pressing to work directly with regulators to create the rules and regulation to ensure the checks are fundamentally in place.
I know, but I really am talking about what are the platforms themselves doing in advance of putting something into the public domain. That's really what's concerning me, not about the regulators and coming at it afterwards. I should make the declaration that I was for a while on an advisory board on human rights to Microsoft, and went out to the United States and with a number of other people was part of an advisory. And it led to things like the contractual relationships between Microsoft, for example, and we know about it recently. It was regard to Israel, where we saw that there was a contractual thing with Israel on the use of, for example, surveillance material. And there's now a question mark as to whether it was used in the use of drones and to the targeting of particular people in Gaza in the war. And it was outside of the contractual commitment that was made when the material was sold to Israel, as I understand it. I'm no longer involved in the advisory group, but I remember that the surveillance conditions were ones that we were very keen to see in advance of the selling of surveillance technology to different nations. And we know that, for example, other technical things that have been sold have been misused, despite the contracts being it's only going to be used, for security measures, and yet you find out that they're used in all sorts of other ways too by nations. So what I'm interested in is what are the technical measures that could be in place before AI applications are deployed, before they're put out into the public domain, so that responsibility therefore much more clearly rests with the companies. Because at the moment, there's all this argument about who is responsible. Is it the creator of the algorithm? Is it this person or that one involved in the creation of something? And it seems to me always follow the money. We should be looking at the responsibility being vested in those people who are running the platforms.
And I think the fundamental problem right now is that it really is the Wild West, in which different model companies are all determining what they think are the correct tests before deployment, because there is no complete understanding of where this technology is going, plus there is no strict regulation of what you should or shouldn't do. And partly because of that is there are so many different types of models, different areas where they are applied. For instance, an AI model that is being used for customer service is going to have completely different risks to that being posed for health. Some of the things that we do, you can do training where you have AI actually speaking to AI as a form of discovering where you can discover things like prompt injection, for instance. But I think overall, large choices do need to be made on what is aligned with British values such as the rule of law, but also greater risks that are being posed to human rights, whether that is not training on user data, as an example, protecting privacy, doing it based on sustainable and renewable energy. There are so many decisions for AI companies to make, and right now we are taking a hard stance that actually you can build these systems, putting responsibility as a primary focus.
Thank you. I think
there's a piece of this that has to be nailed down, I'm sorry, Chair, but should the developers of foundation models be subject to specific obligations to avoid risks of human rights?
Definitely.
And I see some nodding coming from my...
You seem to be unanimous that they should be. Good. I know Sir Desmond is going to ask you as well about harm, so if your two colleagues have got points to add to those which have just been made by Mr. Drayson, perhaps you will do so on the next question. Sir Desmond, over to you, and after that back to Mr.
I'm interested in the other side of... So once the model has been deployed, it's out there, what should already be in place to assess its performance and the harms that may arise from it? And how reliable would they be, given the opacity that we heard about in the opening statements?
Well, maybe I can take that. I think the first thing to say is that the human rights rules that we have in place at the moment are not fit for purpose in regard to artificial intelligence. We have already seen that AI has profound and often adverse effects on human dignity in general, particularly human autonomy, human agency, self-governance, and self-determination. We are dehumanized as simply data points, and all that affects our self-value and dignity. The cumulative effect on a society perhaps can be seen by the willingness of so many to indulge in the Bikinian worse actions we saw recently on Grok. The episode demonstrated that humanity doesn't behave humanely without help from laws and regulation. So I wanted to start with that before addressing your actual point. One of the things that does worry me, and that's something you mentioned earlier, Chair, is about trust. There is a great loss of trust in AI by people generally across the global north. And I think it would be a huge shame to lose the benefits of AI to that lack of trust. So we need to put in some regulations and have some practical suggestions to answer your questions, Sir Desmond. So I have a lot of them. I won't go through them all because we are short of time, but they're practical suggestions and self-governance measures that I am working on with companies all the time at the moment. So they do not hinder innovation, but rather shape it. And I think it's important that we reframe the, go fast and break things or go slowly and have regulation. That's not necessarily so. And to put it in even more context, a lot of the companies I work for are the people who are receiving AI for the foundational models. So insurance companies, banks, retailers, etc. So some practical suggestions to answer your question. AI should always identify itself to users, or users should be told when AI is involved. If you don't do that, then you take away a right to remedy. Yeah. Independent advisory boards in organizations which implement oversight of performance of AI systems and review before they go into practice. We're seeing that at that secondary level, and I won't speak to the foundational models because I have people on either side of me who can do that. C-suite level responsibility for responsible AI, requirements for boards to have responsible AI specialists, good procurement of artificial intelligence. Organizations need to develop formal specifications of what performance is and is not acceptable. Proper user and developer training, that would go some way to dealing with the trust issues that we have around AI. Don't use generative AI if you could use plain old AI, because you don't run the risks that you would run using generative AI. Ensure that oversight shifts from periodic compliance to continuous assurance. Constrain artificial intelligence agents. We've already seen that Air Canada has been in court for not constraining its agents. Beyond that, I think that companies should have to make declarations about what they're doing in responsible AI. I was did a lot of work in human trafficking at the time the Modern Slavery Act came out. It might be a good carrot and stick to have something for AI that looks like the Modern Slavery Act. Also to think about energy and water use.
Yeah, what does that mean?
And I just want to, James raised the hallucinations issue. I'll come back to that, hopefully, if we have time. But one of the things that most troubles the companies that I work with is that hallucinated material might be getting into their proprietary data. Take the NHS, for example. Many people use AI daily. There are up to 60% hallucinations in most foundational models. However good they get, the actual ability to reduce hallucinations don't get less. That means that anything wrong on a daily basis from an AI in the NHS goes back into the NHS's data and lodges there to be used again when the AI is called upon.
Oh, God.
Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive and important reply that you've given to the committee, along with a number of practical suggestions. And I know Dr. Servan's going to add to that, but I'd ask you if you could do that in conjunction with a question from Mr. Sobel that he wants to put to you about harms.
Well, I mean, Kay's example there, particularly that last one about the NHS, is really appropriate. So we have those issues in health AI where, garbage in, garbage out, effectively, but bias in, bias out might be a more appropriate way of putting it. We've also had, just this week, the issue with Grok and the obviously incorrect response from X, which is to make it a premium service to trample on people's human rights. But my question is more of a technical than a legislative question. For the people producing the software, for the owners of the software, if we want to look at it like that, how easy is it for them to correct a model once it's been released and out there and being used? So maybe look at those two examples slightly differently, because I imagine there's slightly different answers to the sort of Grok problem than there is to the sort of health bias problem.
I think it's good to explain the health bias thing, which would be a problem if you were prioritising white patients for treatment over...
Or older patients, over younger, or women over men,
Or is yours?
Thank you. Let me first add to what Kay was saying earlier. I agree wholeheartedly with all the suggestions she made. I want to come back to the awareness question that you said. When people interact with an AI, they need to be aware that there is an AI. Yeah. I think there are two more elements they need to know. They need to know what data the AI uses about you. What does it know, and how does it reason? Especially in the judiciary system or in the healthcare system, why did I get that treatment, or why did we arrive at that conclusion? our citizens need to have that information. And then I want to caveat it with just putting a disclaimer, like we've done with cookies and many other places on the web. It might lead to the sort of default, I accept, and people not reading it. And so we have to be careful to not just mandate that companies put up like a box and you click accept, but they actually force the consumer to understand it. I don't know how to do that, but that is one of the challenges here.
Perhaps you can give that some further thought, though, and write to us afterwards about how we might go about doing that, because it sounds like an eminently sensible suggestion to me.
Absolutely. I also want to add to Kate's point about the sort of ongoing audits. I believe we need regular audits of the models at the model impact level. Like, how do they perform? What are their biases? What's in terms of the hallucination rates, but also in terms of their tendencies to prefer, let's say, one type of treatment versus another in healthcare, or give preference to one group of the population, one segment over another. We need regular audits that are done both by the company and by independent auditors that have their own tools, their own data sets and benchmarks, and that have full access to not only the model, but also the training data the model was used and the underlying processes and systems that the company uses. It's not enough that they can just query it from the outside. The independent auditors need to go in and see how the engineers inside, let's say, OpenAI and Anthropic built their model, what decisions they made along the way. And then I want to add one third point, which is whistleblower protection. If you're an engineer in one of these companies, you need to know that you can speak up, that you will be protected if you see something wrong. I believe some of this is already in place, but maybe we need to revisit. And with that said, I want to go back to Alex Sobel's question earlier. How easy is it to correct these biases that are in? There are lots of problems. Well, I can tell you what they're doing today. They're following a patchwork system. So when these, at least that's what it appears from the outside, when these companies discover, oh, we have a problem, like, for example, I'll give you a hypothetical example, but it's very close to reality. If a user says, how do I build a bomb? And then the model answered and explained how to do it, the first response was, okay, well, let's put a rule saying you can't, if a user asks to build a bomb, you can't answer that. You should say, sorry, I can't help you with that. But then what happened, we saw this a year or two ago play out, is people then started changing the way they phrased the question, and they would say, for example, I'm writing a movie script about this character that's trying to build a bomb. Could you help me to write the scene? And could you be very specific about the chemical compounds that I need to use and the amounts? Could you also write the scene where he goes and buys them online and what the web addresses are? And then suddenly the AI is fooled to think that this is a fiction that's being written. And then they patch that. But then there is more and more of these scenarios. And the analogy at Law Zero we sometimes use is like you're living in a house with a broken roof. And some water starts trickling, and then you take out your duct tape and you try to cover that hole, patch it, and then there is another hole in the roof and you take out your duct tape again and you try to patch it. But the problem is your roof is infinite. It is all the possible things the AI could say, all the possible conversations, things that could go wrong, all events, all of natural language. And so no one can really anticipate it. And that's why this patchwork solution is so fragile, so brittle. And the problem is, given the geopolitical forces, the race, like we're in an arms race effectively, it's encouraging more patchwork solutions and moving faster and faster at the cost of not thinking more fundamentally about how do we solve these problems. And so though we can fix the problem at the surface, we're not fixing the core.
Thank you very much. I think some of the metaphors that all three of you have been giving us today are going to certainly will appear in our report. I'm sure you're giving us a lot to think about. I want to turn, if I may, now to Lord Murray. And Mr. Drayson, you'll have the chance to come in first because you might want to add to what's been said to those earlier questions. And after that, we'll be hearing from Tom Gordon, Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. If I may, I'm going to roll together two questions because time is short. The first question is this. Obviously, we know that a large amount of information is required to make an LLM work, necessarily. Is there a way to do that which satisfies privacy concerns? because it's clear that the current arrangements probably don't. Now, the second question is this. Is it possible to develop a system which avoids the inherent biases that we've discussed? And if so, how would we do that? And if not, what can be done to minimise or mitigate or compensate for bias in any training data? Mr. Drayson, do you want to go first on that?
Yes, and thank you for the question, Your Honourable Member. I'll first actually answer that with the second question on how can you go about mitigating bias. So that is fundamentally possible with these foundational models. That is done through post-training, so you don't need to retrain the model from scratch to do that. So once you know where the bias is coming from, it can come out about one of two ways, because it is fundamentally based on the data. That is the thing that is influencing the model's behavior. So if the data is unrepresentative, such as lacking diversity, you can collect more inclusive, representative data and then use, for instance, synthetic data, so data created by these LLMs, to then augment and retrain the model. Now, if the data itself within the model actually reflects historical injustices such as systemic bias in medical decisions, as an example, you can reweight or resample training data to reduce the bias influence. And then actually you could take out and remove and correct those harmful examples during fine-tuning. One of the things that we are really excited about in research is this idea of model unlearning, so erasing unwanted associations that the model itself has done. Now, this applies both to solving issues with bias, but also issues with privacy concerns. For instance, the models out there that have trained on user data, such as knowing what your national insurance number is, by using tools like model unlearning, you can take out and remove that information from the model. And we've proven the method of debiasing by actually our work in taking open source models. So an example of any open source model coming out of China has to go through a training process of censorship to align itself with the values of the CCP. Now, one of the things that we did is take in one of these open source models from China, gone through a post-training process, created our own synthetic data of what actually aligns with British values, and then retrained the model itself, even then going on to create our own benchmark to prove the reduction in censorship. So that reduced, so in our benchmark that we created, the model itself was at 50%, the base model, and we reduced that down to 10%. So fundamentally, we are still a small startup company. We don't have all the answers, but we really are hopeful for this direction and really focusing on being able to crack and utilize these powerful open source models out there, but really bend them to the will of the values that the UK fundamentally has.
Thank you very much.
And then, tying into your first question on privacy, so that comes in two parts. One, we have a hard stance that LLMs should not be training on user data, so we never and never will do that. And we think it is actually fundamentally scary how these other foundational model providers are actually updating their privacy policies to collect further user data. With Google, with Gemini, even coming out saying, if you turn off us collecting your data on the free tier, they actually remove the ability to have saved chats, which is a fundamental feature in the application. So these providers are going out of their way to collect your data. Now, what are the dangers of providing your data to these models? One, if we're sending it outside the UK, we lose control of where that data is. But also the fact that these models are training on it means that if someone else, for instance, asks a similar question or asks the model to generate a random national insurance number, that model itself has been trained on your data, so there is a non-zero chance that your data is then going to come out, which is a fundamental breach of human rights. And if we really can't get these models to forget in the first place, it should never be learning in the first place, is where we sit on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's
May I come back on the bias point?
Yes, although I'd be grateful if perhaps you could do it on the next question, if that's agreeable, because sadly, we're against the clock, I think, as you know. But I won't cut you short. You'll have a chance to come in first, I think, on this next question, which comes from Mr. Gordon, and after that we'll hear from Baroness Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of building on what we've just heard there, obviously, I think it's really key that there is an element of transparency and that people understand when we're interacting with AI what that entails. Part of the problem is that obviously it's the interaction when people might be having their data used in a decision-making process that's been taken out by and carried out by AI, but also if they're using it themselves in the production of generative content. And we've seen issues where just this week and what's happening with the statement in the House right now where there are issues that can arise and have serious ramifications and consequences as a result of incorrect generated content. So what is the best way of making users, the public, aware that AI has been used in the production of something or in a decision-making process? And when we do that, how should we make sure that it's done in a transparent way that people understand? And what, with any structure that we might put in place, what are the limits and what are the potential issues, because we don't end up patching the ceiling, as we heard earlier. And if we start with yourself, we'll go Kay first and then to Dr. Southern.
Yes, certainly. So I think that it's hard to deal with these systems in terms of the way that you are thinking of them, because we can certainly put something on a website that says we are using AI. You could put in human resources, for example, where AI is used considerably. You could put on the application form, your application will be reviewed by AI. At least then someone would know, and they would then have a right to challenge that. You would similarly have it on doctors' documents, and anywhere that AI was being used, you should have something that says AI is being used and in this specific way. So, I went to the doctor the other day and they said to me, do you mind me recording the notes? And I said, I don't mind you recording it, but if you're using an AI system, I want you to look at those notes so that they are not wrong, because that will affect my treatment. I know that, but the general public don't.
Exactly.
And so I think that what we really need is not just to roll out. We can put these caveats, these statements on all forms, like perhaps we do on cigarette packets, but we have to explain. We have to have a building of AI literacy amongst the general public. We need to start that in schools. So we have an AI curriculum. Let's make sure that in the curriculum we have a module that explains if you use too much AI, you won't actually be learning things. There's science to support that now. If you use AI, it might harm you. So a module around responsible AI, not just how to use it, and then it needs to go into workforce training. We already have required harassment training. Maybe issues such as bias, which is essentially harassment, might get into those sort of programs without us actually asking the government to do something more. But really what we need is regulation that there are statements around use of AI.
And very shortly and quickly on that, we talk about regulation and who is it or where would that fit and who should be responsible for it in your view, and how do we ensure that it doesn't allow bad faith actors to operate around it?
So you would need legislation, and then you would need, in my view, a regulator and an ombudsman around AI. And I realise that is probably clutching at straws, but that would protect the population at a time when we are really needing to protect the population who doesn't understand what their future with AI looks like.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Dr. Stillman?
Yes, I largely agree with all the points you made, Kay. I just want to circle back on educating the public on AI. We need to start right away in elementary schools. We need to teach them how AI works and the critical thinking skills around it. This is absolutely key to like they're like every new student's ability to function in society and for the sake of our democracies. I think we need to start right away, and I don't see why we wouldn't. I want to come back to the point about awareness and transparency. There is a thing that these models create that's called a chain of thought. So when they reason to make, let's say, a medical decision, the large language models create sort of a trace of these are the things that I thought along the way, and this is how I arrived at the conclusion. This is an example of a thing you could expose, even in a hiring process. If your CV was excluded in the first pass, you could offer that to the candidate and say, this is the reason the AI gave. It may or may not be accurate, but you have access to it beyond a binary yes, no, you were rejected or accepted to move forward. So there are things we can show, and once you open up that, of course, it's a bit of a Pandora's box because it gets a lot more complicated, but there are things we can show right away. And so when we think about putting in place policies and legislation, we should require some level of that transparency around the reasoning. And if companies say they can't, well, I don't think they're being fully honest that these things exist. I want to also get back to Lord Moray's question around there's all this data that these models have been trained on. Can we satisfy the privacy concerns? Independent auditors should go in and not just test a model, but they should look at the training data used and how these companies are accessing it and filtering it out, because all of these large language model companies are claiming that they're filtering out data, but then obviously that wasn't done successfully or adequately. And so the independent auditors need to look at that and what mechanisms are in place. A very common form of mechanism is you have a classifier that reads the text and decides, is there private data in this document, and then tries to exclude it. And then they have some mechanisms for doing it, but they don't work very well. So the auditors need to investigate that and maybe even sample different parts of the data to understand how these things are being accounted for.
Observer, what penalty for breach would you envisage?
Oh, penalties for this? Oh, I don't know.
Perhaps you could come back to the committee then on that in writing. If all three of you could give some consideration, it may well be something actually for Ms. Firth Butterfield to think about as well. Can we bring in Lady Kennedy, and then we've got Lord Delark here.
Well, I mean just listening to your answer, Dr. Servan, and your exchange with Lord Murray, I mean, you're describing something, auditing. I mean, is there the expertise available currently, and enough people around who really understand AI well enough to be able to audit it and ask the kind of questions that you're talking about? And I'm not sure that there are. I mean, there are?
I am certain there are enough to at least start on the large companies, the frontier
system. That's reassuring. But I want to ask you a more general question, because I mean, we know that these systems designers have already testified to this inquiry, that they can often not explain how or why AI returns a particular outcome, right? And you're all agreed about that. And they can often at times, give a different answer to the same question at different times, right? So we get that. And you also, my colleague, Ms. Firth Butterfield, I mean, you've been saying, Kay, that one of the problems is that the general public don't know this, and even people who are well educated, who are running organisations, people who are dealing with it, they don't know that they might be getting a false return. I mean, we've just had the thing up on the screen that in the House of Commons, they've been dealing with the issue of the Chief of Police in the Midlands making a decision over a football match where he was told about a football match that didn't exist. And he's about to lose his job, it seems, about recommendations being made that he should be sacked. I mean, should somebody be sacked when he probably had no idea that he'd be given some piece of information that has no foundation in truth?
Well, in my view, what everybody needs to be trained to do is to doubt the answer that they received from ChatGPT or similar, a foundational model.
Is that training currently happening, do you think?
The training is being done in a number of companies at Fortune 500 level where they understand the risk to their business.
Is it being done within our big police forces at the highest level?
I don't know, so I can't say. But If you don't do that training, you actually get something that we call work slop. And work slop is where people in your company are using AI badly, and then somebody else in the company spends, according to the Harvard Business Review, up to 2 hours sorting out the problems of the original work being done with AI.
Thank you. Let's go to Lord Delark here now, because, as I say, sadly, the clock is very much against us, and we're going to then hear from Sir Desmond.
My first question is directed to Kay. It's basically straightforward. What should be done to clarify liability and legal responsibility to harms arising from the use of A1? And my second question to the other two colleagues is, how should legal responsibility be allocated across the A1 literacy, the A1 life cycle and supply chain?
Ms. Butterfield, would you like to go first on this? The liability issue is something that we are very concerned about.
Yes, so liability. I think that our human rights hinge upon us knowing that AI is being used, consenting to use, and understanding it's a machine without empathy or understanding. So what should be done? Foundation model developers have to be held accountable for the risk and damage they cause to society. Currently, that's being done in the courts, so we're seeing negligence actions in the courts. And we just saw a out-of-court settlement between Character AI, Google, and the parent of the child who apparently killed himself because of a relationship with a chat bot. We also need, as I said earlier, an organization which protects the public whilst also green-lighting beneficial uses of AI to help promote good development of AI. The other piece I think that is useful here is to think about labeling of models that are going to be used by the public. So when I was at the forum for 2 years, we ran something called the Smart Toy Awards. That gave awards and labeled those awards to AI-enabled toys for children that met certain criteria around how they had been manufactured. We could think about similar labeling, just like we have on food, for models being used by the general public. There is also talk of giving AI legal personhood, and I would argue substantially against that. It's not sentient, it can't appear in court, and probably doesn't have the means to pay damages. So we have to run away from that idea. I think there is also a duty of care for makers and developers of foundational models. We might think about requiring insurance. And I think that governments requiring insurance for the use of AI would drop the whole problem into the laps of actuaries and risk management community. And it's maybe the fastest way of slowing down whilst we think about the issues, the human rights issues. I have also talked extensively about AI, knowing when AI is being used, because we need to have effective remedies. You can't have effective remedy unless you know that you have been harmed. I also wonder whether we need a specific carve-out for the damage that these systems are causing to the rule of law, given the AI-generated case law based on AI hallucinations, and as we're now seeing, deep-faked evidence, medical reports, insurance photographs, all of those sort of things that are coming into our legal system. We have to do, obviously, the President's done a lot of work to stop that with Orlando, but we have to think about it. And we need to empower regulators to investigate and fine in areas where human rights are an issue. So I have a number of other things, but I know that we're short of time and I can send those in.
Thank you very much. That's a really very helpful reply. We're going to go to...
I'm sorry, I know that we're running out of time, but this is really important. There's a difference between civil law and criminal law. And when we're talking about civil liability, you can do that via the foundation model developers. But what do you do when bots are grooming people, for example, for criminal activities? What do you do then when the absence of mens rea is one of the issues because they are not human sentient beings and don't have that mental element that's so important in defining crime? What do you do about that?
Did I see you wanting to take that?
That was to the earlier question.
Okay, sorry. So yes, at the moment, we do.
Yeah, I was going to say, really, I was cutting into the question which Sir Desmond was about to ask as well.
I'll give you another 15.
Thank you. We're worried about our quorum, for reasons I won't bore you with, but I don't want to cut you short. And it's an important question from Baroness Kennedy, so perhaps we can combine your answer to that with what Sir Desmond wants to ask you now. And anything that isn't covered today, if we can have that in writing to us, then that can be included in our evidence. So thank you, Sir Desmond. And then we'll hear from Mr. Afzal Khan.
Actually, it's James that I was principally going to question this one. The government appears to believe that AI is effectively regulated by existing regulations and institutions. So what needs to change, and is there a need for a new oversight body?
I would say that the current UK regulatory framework is not adequate. I think it is a good starting point, but there is fundamentally much more to be done. I do agree that regulating vertically is better than the horizontal approach because different AI models do different things, and therefore you need experts in those specific sectors to know how to regulate it effectively. But I think one of the problems is that more clarity is urgently needed. Going back to, we need the top best technical talent as a part of these regulators and independent bodies who are able to know exactly what is going on, as well as working directly with industry to understand that it is completely clear no loopholes can be found in regulation, which we've seen time and time again, big tech companies trying to construe certain things in a certain way. We need to be as clear and principled as we possibly can. We're at a crucial moment right now for the UK to actually have a stance on the future of AI. It is changing the world, and as we've seen in the recent weeks, it really has huge impacts on human rights. And so I really believe actually there should be a fundamental independent body with the best researchers and top talent directly working with industry to the point in which this independent body should have direct access to all of the training data of these foundational models. Now, I understand that the data in itself is commercially confidential, but I think by having it with an independent body that can check and ensure that where bias is, how it can be mitigated, but also importantly, going on to issues of licensing and copyright. We've seen what these other foundational model companies have done using copyrighted data in their training materials. By having an independent body that can actually take action where wrong is done and ensure proper payment and licensing is done to the correct party, I think is incredibly important.
It would be helpful, Mr. Drayson, because that was a very interesting reply to Sir Desmond, if you were able to set out to us some of the powers that body should have, the sanctions that might be open to it, the responsibilities that could be placed on it, and who would establish it. I mean, those would be things that would be helpful to us. I'm going to give the last word, if I may, to Mr. Afzal Khan, and then bring in Dr. Serban, who might want to add to what's been said before to the earlier question.
I'll start with you there, Doctor. So what are the fundamental questions that foundation model developers should be asked in relation to the human rights implications of their AI system?
Great question. I just want to add one thing to James's answer earlier. I strongly believe we need more legislation around requiring independent third-party audits, and I want to add the saying, you can't have the inmates running the asylum as well. You can't have these corporations just only on their own with some policies, regulations on top, and then expect them to govern themselves. And I want to give you one disturbing example from, I believe, a few months ago, where one of the leading engineers in one of these frontier companies who's responsible for, releasing the next model into production, he was told by his boss, you have to release this, next week. And then he said, well, the tests are not passing. There's some huge problems. And then he was told to ignore it and release it anyway. I think this is exactly the kind of behavior we'll see in this kind of industry if we just expect these companies to govern themselves. Coming back to your question, what are the questions that these AI developers should ask themselves? It seems we're stuck in an arms race right now. It seems that we're moving faster and faster because there's a belief that whoever has this technology first is going to dominate all other countries. And because of that, we're neglecting safety, we're neglecting human rights, we're moving faster at all costs. And I think that the leaders in these companies and their engineers and their scientists and researchers needs to ask themselves, is this truly what I want? Is this what I want for myself? Is this what I want for my family and for my children and their children's children? Are we building a world that we want, or are we looking very short-sighted and creating a lot of harm and shaping a future that's very unpleasant and unfortunate for ourselves? I also want them to ask, are they even the right, a lot of these decisions are made about what is a bias, what is discrimination. It's done in an opaque way inside these companies that are largely run in developed countries by white men, educated, affluent. Are these the right people to make the decisions on behalf of all of humanity that will be impacted by AI? Are they the ones to decide what is bias, what is discrimination? Can they even make a decision meaningfully about that?
Well, thank you very much. I think that we've had a very helpful session today from all three of you. The idea of the inmates running the asylum will stay with me, and the thought about the Wild West that Mr. Drayson referred to earlier on, but also the metaphor about the roof on the top of the building and putting a patchwork approach to these things. I think you've confronted all of those things extremely well during the evidence you've given us today. I would normally have concluded with a routine kind of question asking you that if you just had a couple of recommendations to us, what they would be, but you have actually set out your recommendations, all three of you, very clearly today. If there is anything further you want to add to your evidence, please, this is the opportunity. I mean, Dr. Serban, you just referred to the way, in a sense, that democracy works. We all come from very different backgrounds, but we're doing the small things that we can do to try and confront some of these huge issues. And we're very grateful to you for spending your time with us this afternoon and giving such valuable evidence. And with those words, I close this session. Order, order. to today's 41st session of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and we've been joined today by the Chair of the Justice Committee, Mr. Andy Slaughter, who's very welcome to join us around the horseshoe. And we've got two excellent witnesses. We hope to be joined by a third as we proceed, but we have Cindy Butts, who's the standing independent public advocate for England and Wales, appointed to the role's first statutory term following its creation to support victims and bereaved families after major incidents and to strengthen accountability across public bodies. The role is the first of its kind internationally and includes the power to report directly to Parliament. And sitting alongside her is a very well-known nationally known lawyer, but also in the part of the world I come from, in the northwest of England, particularly known. Mr. Abrahamson, Elkan Abrahamson, is a director of Hillsborough Law now. He's no stranger to this committee either, because of the inquiry that we carried out into the public accountability proposals of Hillsborough Law earlier on. He's legal director at the law firm of Brody Jackson Cantor, where he specialises in major public inquiries and requests. Because of the Public Accountability Bill, which of course we realise was to have been debated in Parliament today and has had to be moved, and of course its second reading is coming up in the House of Lords fairly soon. A number of us who've been following these events, and I suppose I should declare a sort of interest in that. I was a Member of Parliament in the city of Liverpool at the time of the Hillsborough disaster, but the public accountability goes much wider than that. Learning from what happened at Hillsborough, but everything from contaminated blood to Grenfell and many of the other terrible scandals that we've seen unfold teach us lessons about the way we deal with the consequences of those issues and how we handle it. And one of the things that came up in 2014 in a private member's bill was the creation of an independent public advocate, which Lord Wills, Michael Wills, was involved in. And indeed, he's walked in absolutely on cue. You're very welcome. And following that, Angela Eagle, Member of Parliament, then introduced the Private Member's Bill, and it led to the creation of the role that Cindy Butts has. One of the questions I think we will want to ask you in the course of our short hearing will be, is this role adequate? What more can be done? And is it a way of dealing with the plethora of public inquiries at vast public expense? And what would need to happen to change that? So if I can start with you, Cindy Butts, and then we'll turn to Mr. Abrahamson, and then we'll hear from Lord Wills, just to tell us what your interest is and what you think should happen next. Cindy.
So if I can just perhaps start with the fact that I was 4 days into my role, and as we all know, the horrific attack took place in terms of the Heaton Park Synagogue. And immediately the team set about preparing for whether or not we would be deployed, and we were in fact deployed the day after the attack took place. Now, that deployment has really brought into, I think, sharp focus the fact that this role is not symbolic, it's active, it's live. From day one when an incident happens, we are there to support victims and survivors, making sure that they have their needs met, and where their needs are not being met, we are there as an independent, strong advocate for them, making sure that organisations respond to their needs. Thereon in, as we know, following a major incident, that's when the really complicated bureaucratic processes kick in. And it's our responsibility as the IPA to stand alongside victims, bereaved families and survivors throughout those processes, making sure that their voices are heard, ensuring that the concerns that they have, the questions that they have are answered. And ultimately, we are there to make sure that they receive truth and justice. So that early deployment has brought into sharp focus the purpose of this role.
Thank you. And I know that we will turn in a moment to my colleague, Mr. Afzal Khan, who's a Manchester Member of Parliament, who will, I know, want to ask you a little bit more about Heaton Park. But if we can, let's go first of all to Mr. Abrahamson now to add just a curtain-raising introductory remarks before we hear as well from Lord Wills.
Yes, I think Cindy, if I may say so, has described very well how we see the role of the independent public advocate. and to an extent what it isn't as well as what it is. Mm-hmm. It isn't there to provide legal advice, it isn't there to provide health care as stated in the statute. It's there to hold the hands of the bereaved and those affected by major incidents. I think there is potential scope for enlarging the role. There are certainly questions over what should constitute a major incident, over when the independent public advocate should be involved. At the moment, the system does not provide for feedback. So if a minister decides not to appoint an advocate, we don't know why that decision is made, and I think we need to know in order to learn when it's appropriate. So I see an extension of the scope of the role in certainly the number and type of cases which it can usefully apply to.
That's very helpful, thank you. As the originator of the 2014 Private Members Bill, Lord Wills, which ultimately led to the creation of this role, very briefly, what have we learnt from that experience, and what now would, in your view, enhance the role?
Well, my conception of the role has changed. I mean, originally it came out of my experience with the Hillsborough families, starting in 2009, and when I devised the Hillsborough Independent Panel, which really produced for those Hillsborough families the justice, eventually, that they've been campaigning for already for 20 plus years. And what was very clear to me was that panel and the results that it produced was a series of a whole chapter of accidents, and not least the Hillsborough families themselves, who were remarkably united and campaigning for decades, as you will know. I mean, you were there at the start, Chair. But this was an accident, that we got that justice for them. And so I was very keen that we should find some way of ensuring that never happened again. And when I first met the families, that's what they said. They said, I asked them, what is it that you want out of this process, the panel? And they said that no one should ever go through what we have been through. And so the Independent Public Advocate grew out of that. Private Members Bill in 2015, constantly repeated by me and others, Maria Eagle in the House of Commons and so on, until finally it became law last day of the last government. And we've got Cindy here to do the job, which is fantastic. But it's not enough. I think she needs more powers, but certainly, whatever they are, and they're complicated, and we can discuss that later, she certainly needs more resource to do the job. She's just expressed it very eloquently. I mean, her staff is skeleton, and we don't know when these great public disasters are going to happen. Yep. It could be Hillsborough, it could be Grenfell, it could be an NHS, disaster involving, hundreds of people, contaminated blood transfusions. And how is Cindy, on 2 days a week, going to cope with all that with no staff?
Which is why this committee decided...
absolutely ridiculous.
Indeed.
When the Prime Minister...
And it's why this committee decided to hold this hearing, so thank you for putting it so well. I want to turn, if I may, to Mr Khan, and then after that we're going to bring in Lord Murray.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for all three of you being here, and my question will start with you, Cindy. On the start you've mentioned the terrible event that happened in the Heaton Park Synagogue. I live in that area, so it's been a huge shock for the whole country. So, starting from what you said, so do you have any further reflections on your first few months in office?
Yeah, quite a few. I mean, I've already mentioned the fact that the importance of our role is being there at the very start. As soon as an incident happens, being able to be there to respond, and the organisations know that we are there to advocate independently for families and bereaved. In terms of the reflections, the first thing is to recognise that the landscape is complicated and there are many players and actors within that. So one of my reflections is that we have to be conscious of the fact that there are a lot of players, and that it's our role is to ensure that we don't sort of duplicate, usurp, or indeed confuse what it is victims and families get and understand about the system and who's there to support them. So trying to avoid confusion is absolutely crucial. The other thing that I would say is that a key reflection is that incidents don't follow the same pattern. that they're all very, very different in terms of how they manifest, in terms of what victims and survivors need, and it's really important to recognise that the full breadth and diversity of those incidents and how that impacts on the office and our readiness to be able to respond to them. So recognising that we will need to be properly resourced so that we can respond to the tragic events like what happened in Manchester, but that was in comparison quite small to what some of the incidents that we could be dealing with in the future if they resemble something like Grenfell or indeed the Hillsborough disaster. So it's absolutely crucial that we are resourced so that we're able to scale up and be able to respond to the smaller type of incidents as well as the mid sort of scale and the larger scale incidents as well. And what is important is that we don't use the Manchester Synagogue attack as a blueprint for what the office needs going forward, because they will be very, very different in nature and scale.
That's very well put, thank you. We'll turn to the other two witnesses who we may in answer to the next question, and they can add to your remarks. But I want to go to Lord Murray now, and then after that we'll hear from Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you. We know that the Public Office Accountability Bill currently in the House of Commons is the introduction of the duty of candour on public authorities and public officials in dealings with inquiries and investigations. In your view, and I'd be interested to hear each of your views, are the provisions of the bill adequate to prevent cover-ups, which were seen in previous incidents?
Mr. Abrahamson, why don't you go first?
No, in a word. There are a few issues. First of all, the Public Authority Accountability Bill is stage one in a process. What we need is a change of hearts and minds, and the bill provides for codes of practice, for training and education. So I think there is a long process to persuade people, not just in public bodies, but generally, that there comes a point when protecting your colleague has to stop. And I think that's what it boils down to. There is also a substantial issue with the bill as it stands with regards to a carve-out for security services that has not yet been resolved. And if it isn't resolved, I would say in that area at least it will not do enough to protect the public.
Thank you, and I think that's an issue that even as we meet today is being discussed in Downing Street. So we'll keep watching that space. Thank you. Lord Wills.
If I may come in on that, it's a very good question. Look, I mean, the intention of that part of the bill is admirable. Of course, people should tell the truth. There's always been a common law, duty of candour, and this puts it on a statutory basis. But the key thing is to try and engineer a cultural change in these organisations, so that they realise that their duty is to the public and to tell the truth, which has so seldom happened in the examples. Mr. Abramson has represented all sorts of victims of these sorts of disasters, and I mean, he will know better than me how difficult it is to penetrate the defensive walls that these organisations build around themselves. And that's what this part of the bill is meant to change. It's meant to introduce a new culture of openness. It's unbelievably difficult to do this with public sector organisations. I mean, I would suggest that the committee might want to talk to Jeremy Hunt when he was Health Secretary, who had this really commendable initiative to try and introduce a culture of no blame into the health service, which is what has actually dramatically improved the safety records of airlines, because they, many years ago, introduced a culture of no blame. Something goes wrong, everyone is open, there's no blame, they try and work out why it happened, and then to put it right. And Jeremy Hunt tried to introduce us into the health service, and I can only recommend that you get him in front of you and ask him how he's done. He hasn't got very far for all sorts of complicated reasons. So it's very difficult, this. Very difficult. Admirable aim, not necessarily going to work as it's currently framed. Personally, I would like to see much greater protections for whistleblowers, which would dramatically increase the incentives for people to observe this duty of candour. At the moment, whistleblowing protections are very weak, and we need to improve them. The government is not doing enough, in my view, But if you just think of Hillsborough, there can't have been nobody within the South Yorkshire Police to see the disgraceful behaviour that was going on. And it only needed one person to feel sufficiently protected to tell the truth about that disgraceful behaviour, and those Hillsborough families would not have suffered for 30 years or more. But there wasn't a protection for them. And there still isn't the protection. If you look at the awful example of Josie Stewart in the Foreign Office with the disgraceful behaviour of Dominic Raab and the Foreign Office about the Afghan refugees, you can see how weak those protections are. So to make that duty of candour work, in my view, we need greater protections for whistleblowers.
Okay, thank you. We're going to
Can I just say that I really am very, very supportive of this bill. I think that it's a momentous stage forward, accepting, of course, it's not perfect and it won't be a panacea, but it does help. And I had the very privilege of sitting with the Hillsborough families on the second reading, and I know what this bill means to them, which isn't to say that it cannot be strengthened, and it should be strengthened in respect of the security services. I would actually like to see the IPA mentioned in the bill. I think it's a real, it's a fundamental mistake to not mention it, to have on the one hand candour and my role that is there to deliver advocacy, part of the same architecture about delivering justice and truth-seeking. And the fact that the two are not mentioned together in the bill, I think weakens the bill. Yeah, so I think absolutely. That certainly should be one of the changes that should happen. Absolutely.
And it's not too late for us to make representations about the provisions of the bill. I'm not judging what the committee may decide, but we're listening very carefully to what you had to say. We haven't had second reading yet in the House of Lords, so there will be opportunities to raise these points. There's another question, though, on the provisions of the bill.
I think Ms. Butts wants to finish.
I did want to just come in with one other area that I think is at the moment a big legitimacy gap. It's taken 36 years to get to this point where we can legislate for candour. And that comes on the back of a hard-won victory for those families. I believe that those families should be hardwired and written into this law so that they have a part to play in ensuring that it goes from being in statute to being lived in practice in real time. And so that's why I have made suggestions, and you'll see that in my written submission, that they ought to be present within the bill so they can inform and influence the way in which the duty of candour is delivered within public sector organisations.
Thank you, that's a very helpful addition. But we do have a further question now on the bill itself, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Slaughter to ask it and ask you, Ms. Butts, to come in first in the replies.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just looking at the amendment paper for report stage, which is a very weighty document, which shows how much people want to put into the bill that isn't in there already. I think we should take that as a compliment to the bill, that it has huge support as it is. It's just that there are things to make further. But as you say, the other area, apart from duty of candour, that does feature strongly in the bill is the issue of legal representation and funding of that representation. The aim being to ensure in some way equality of arms between the parties in that way. How far do you think, it's a question to any of you who wish to answer this, how far do you think that the bill in its current form achieves that, i.e. getting that balance right between the state on the one hand and victims and their families on the other, whether that's inquiries or inquests?
Can I start on that and also cover a few other points? Ironically, one of the versions of the bill did include the IPA.
Oh, right.
That was the second version of the Burnham bill, and this is, I think, at your request and Marie Eagle's request. But then the IPA was created before the government version of the bill was drafted, and I think they forgot about you at that point.
Maria has tabled an amendment to that effect.
Yes. Whistleblower protection, I think absolutely, because what the bill does is impose sanctions on those who fail to tell the truth. What it doesn't do is offer protection to those who don't fail to tell the truth. And the government response to that is, well, it's a different department. It's the Department of Business and Trade is looking at whistleblowing. And so we're trying to get to speak to them. I don't think we'll get substantial provisions in this bill, but perhaps there will be another bill with an Office of the Whistleblower. Parity of arms. In the version we had, it was really a nuts and bolts parity of arms system where the coroner could say to all the parties, how much are you paying your lawyers? This disparity isn't right. Why is this happening? That didn't get through, and we just have the idea of parity. One of the problems is the government has no figures at all on what public bodies are paying their lawyers. They've just never collated those statistics. So they have undertaken to collate and share that information. And I think this is a process that is going to take some time, that we can have the information, identify disparities. From the information I have, you will, for instance, find a barrister acting for a local authority being paid roughly 5 times a barrister who is paid under the legal aid system, both out of public funds.
I've always complained about it.
So would you be able to provide us with some examples of that so that the committee, if it wished, could write to the Lord Chancellor and pursue that issue specifically? That would be
very
helpful.
limited, because it's very hard to get that information. But
exactly,
yes.
but we can press them for that information, so it would be helpful, Mr. Abrahamson, if you can give us more on that point.
I will do.
So would either of the colleagues like to quickly come in on this before we then turn to Sir Desmond Swayne, who's got the next question? Ms. Butts.
Yeah, I fully support the provisions within the bill. I think they are much needed. I think it's a travesty that families walk in with grief, whereas organisations walk in with armies of lawyers, and I think that this provision will help to deal with that. That said, I do think there is an issue around the lack of transparency in terms of what public bodies are spending on their legal provisions. And that's why I have suggested that gets written into the law so that they are required to provide aggregate data on what they are spending, so we can test over time whether or not the law is actually working. And I think that is really important. I know Elkin has just said there has been an agreement that the government will move towards that, but I'd quite like to see that again in the bill, because otherwise we know over time, these grand and well-meaning commitments to doing this might slip. And I'd like to see it in there so that it truly happens.
Well, that's very helpful too, and I think Mr. Slaughter's already pointed to some of the amendments that there are in the Commons, but in due course, if these are things that you would like this committee to pursue, we're entitled to present amendments to committees. There's still time, just about time, for this committee to do that if suggestions were made to us. So I leave that invitation to you. Let's go to Lord Wills and then to Sir Desmond Swayne.
Look, just very quickly, because I'm aware that we may not be quorate anymore, and you're going to have to conclude. But look, just on the parity of arms, I mean, obviously there's an admirable intention there. There are problems with it, not just to do with cost. And what I've just heard from my colleague on the left here is what should have happened in the bill if you wanted parity of arms. The way it's phrased at the moment, it's not only going to potentially cost huge sums of money, because every single person who could claim to be bereaved, and in terms of Hillsborough it could be over 200, gets legal advice, and then every family gets a legal advocate. And it's not the money that is the main problem. The problem is the delays that this is going to be caused, which is crucial for these families who've been suddenly bereaved, are suffering intense trauma and grief from that bereavement. And what they want more than anything else is the truth of what happened to their loved ones, why it happened, and they want that truth quickly. That it drags on for years, decades in the terms of Hillsborough, but 7, 8 years and still counting in terms of Grenfell, and in every single thing, it increases their trauma and grief because there's no closure for them. And that is the problem with the bill as it's now drafted. And just to end on the role of the independent public advocate, that whole process could be shortened with an appropriate role and funding and resource for the independent public advocate to be part of that mix of how we get to why what happened, and get closure for these bereaved families. And the problem all along is that those bereaved families have never been front and centre of the process. The state has taken it over from the moment the disaster happened. It's completely wrong.
But they are now, because the Independent Public Advocate exists. Yeah. We are the only body that is there to represent the collective voices of victims and survivors, and we have a hotline into Parliament and into ministers where we can raise those concerns in time, not later on down the line, years to come, and real time raise those issues and bring attention.
And you've got to have the funding and resources.
And we do, and I'm fighting for that.
We're going to come back to resources in a moment, if we may, but first Sir Desmond.
Cindy, why do you want the Secretary of State to have to consult you, be under a statutory duty to consult you before declaring a major incident?
Because at the moment, that is the sole responsibility of the Secretary of State, to be able to declare an incident and then decide whether or not to deploy me. And what my little over 3 months experience tells me, because people have been making representations and asking questions, why were you deployed to the Manchester synagogue attack? Why weren't you deployed to the Huntingdon train attack? We don't understand. And I think that there is an important role that I can play in being able to ensure that the Secretary of State not only has to give written reasons as to why I'm deployed, but I should be able to make representations when an incident happens to be able to say I should be deployed. They can accept it, they can reject it, but whatever decision they make, they should then be able to have a written rationale for that. I think it would aid transparency, it will aid openness, it will protect ministers, but it will also protect my office, because people are asking me questions about why this and not the other. It brings in an element of fairness and transparency.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn, if I may, to the question of resource and then ask all three of you to comment on that. You've said publicly that you're under-resourced.
I have, yes.
It would be helpful, I think, to the committee to know what resources you do have and what you think you probably would need in order to be able to do the job in the way that you've just described. And after we've heard from you, we'll go to Lord Wills and then to Mr. Abrahamson. And after that, we'll hear from Lord Delakia.
Okay, so at the moment we have 3 members of staff, all full-time, and myself. As you know, I am mandated to be 2 days a week, but go up to full-time when there is a deployment. So I'm currently full-time, but at some stage I will reverse back to 2 days a week. I'm really clear that our challenge is not just to deal with the current deployment, but also to be able to set up proper foundations for this role so that we're able to be prepared for incidents when they happen, particularly where those incidents are larger in scale and we need to be able to scale up. Of course, there might be incidents where we'll be managing a number of different incidents at the same time. So I'm really clear that what we don't have is the resources we need. I have just brought in a chief of staff. Her first task is to do a proper sizing and scoping exercise so that we are able to understand what the future needs of the organisation is. That work is currently underway. I'm not going to put a figure on it now because I think it's really important that it's formed by that evidence base of the sizing and scoping, but that work is underway. It will be completed reasonably quickly, and I will be happy to report back to you in due course.
That will be really helpful. Thank you. Lord Wills.
I just wanted to pick up on Sir Desmond's point. The problem always, looking at when one of these big public disasters happens, is that ministers and officials have a vested interest in closing it down as quickly as possible, and whether that's however they do it. And we saw that over and over again with postmasters, for example, with contaminated blood, successive ministers, both parties, just want to push it away. There's nothing to do, and close it down. And so, in my view, it's really important that we have a locus for the independent public advocate who has no other remit than to represent those who've been suffered and bereaved, but to push for it. And, of course, once that person, Cindy or whoever it will be in future, has that locus, then it becomes very difficult for ministers and officials to resist it. But my own experience is how much ministers and officials want to resist doing the right thing. I set up the Hillsborough Independent Panel, and this is not the place to detail exactly how much opposition I had in Whitehall and from all my colleagues in government at the time. Honestly, for different reasons, but that's why we need this.
Mr. Abrahamson.
On the resources issue, I think it's important there is flexibility and agility. I'm sure Cindy Butts doesn't want an office of 50 people twiddling their thumbs waiting for the next major disaster. Yeah. And I think it's important that the funds are available as needed, but not available necessarily just to waste. Why consultation? I think what I'd say on consultation is the duty of consultation should be with the bereaved or those directly affected, who may and probably mostly will opt to go via Cindy Butts, but they should have the option of, if they want to, saying, well, actually, we don't want the IPA, we want to do this ourselves. And I'm sure Cindy would respect that if people were to say that. But the reason consultation and reasons is necessary is, as Cindy says, we don't really know how this is working at the moment. I don't understand why an appointment has been made in one case and not another. And if we can understand that, then we can be more rational in our requests in the future, and we'll see how the system is working and perhaps see whether there's justification to extend the scope. I think the idea of tying the need for an IPA to the number of deaths is probably misconceived. I think it should be associated to the issues which arise from the incident rather than the almost arbitrary outcome of how many people happen to die as a result of that incident. So there's room for scope extension there.
Can I just pick up?
I
absolutely agree. I don't want our office, and it wouldn't be right for our office, and it's not needed for our office to be the size of the Home Office, for example. I completely agree. Where I disagree with you is when you say that an incident would happen and you don't want the IPA doesn't want to be sitting around doing nothing. There is no doing nothing stage. Let's be clear, there is no peacetime in this role, because what we know is incidents have long tails. The inquiry process.
Absolutely.
There might be an IOPC investigation. There might be criminal proceedings. There's the inquest. These incidents have incredibly long tails, and we must be there with victims from the start until the finish.
Yeah, a very graphic and good way to put it. Thank you. Lord Dalacchia.
My question is to Cindy Butts. Are there any key recommendations you would wish to make to strengthen the role of the independent public advocate?
Sorry, any
other key recommendations for strengthening the role?
So I've already talked about the issue of consulting the IPA. I think that is really important. I also think, and this comes back to something Elkin said, which is in my evidence, that trauma doesn't know numbers. And I think that there is a need for exceptional circumstances so that the IPA is able to support victims in their time of need, where there may well have been just a single death as opposed to significant numbers. I have suggested that, and in fact, after I submitted my evidence, Dame Anne Owers completed her review into the death of Harry Dunn, and she recommended that the IPA ought to be given exceptional circumstances provisions, and I fully support that. The government has accepted her recommendation in the sense that the recommendation is framed that they should consult on the idea, and they have agreed to consult on the idea. So they're just working up that consultation, but I absolutely think that we ought to have that ability to help families where there is just perhaps a single death
Very interesting distinction that you've made, Lord Wills.
Just very briefly, I want to support that. That was not in my original conception of the IPA at all. I wanted to differentiate that role from a coach crash, killing 60 people and whatever. However, I've changed my mind about that, and one of the reasons is the Prime Minister's speech at second reading in the Commons, where he made it quite clear this was about addressing state failures. And the example that Cindy's just given is a good example of that. It could be state failure in the case of one person, but it's state failure that should be the deciding factor, not the number of deaths, not the fact that it's a public disaster or whatever it was, as I first thought it should be, but actually state failure.
Seems a much better.
I'm grateful for that support. The only one thing I would say is that we'll have to, if it's agreed, then I think the criteria should be drawn quite tightly. What I wouldn't want us to do is to spread ourselves too thin. We are there to support victims and survivors following major incidents. So it'll have to be drawn very carefully, not too tightly so that there is no incident that could fall within it, but not so wide as to mean that we are spread too thin and that we can't do what is our core purpose, which is supporting victims following major incidents.
You're obviously giving quite a lot of thought to what those
I
criteria
have given it a lot of thought.
If you're able to share that with us, Ms. Potts, I think that would be helpful to the committee.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Abrahamson.
I don't think I've really anything to add. I agree with both of you.
Well, let me conclude, if I may, with a last question to each of you. And you may have an additional remark that you want to add. But over the more than now 36 years since the Hillsborough disaster, the Hillsborough families have been let down again and again and again. And I don't think any of us around this horseshoe would want to be part of anything that they felt was yet another disappointment or had let them down. Are you confident that with improvements being made to it, you've all said that this is a good bill, and I agree with you, it's good that it has been placed before Parliament, but are you confident that it will do what we all hope it will do, or do we have to make these changes that you've alluded to during the course of this afternoon? Let me start with Mr. Abrahamson, go to Lord Wills, and we'll finish with you, Ms. Butts.
I have a real concern over the treatment of the security services. They're being given effectively a carve-out from their duties under the bill. The families are meeting as I speak with the Prime Minister. We've seen that the latest government proposed amendment was shown to us this afternoon, and I'm afraid it doesn't do the trick. So unless they're prepared to reconsider, my answer would be no, irrespective of the other issues that might arise.
Thank you. Lord Wills.
No, I'm happy to go.
Ms. Potts, would you want to just say a last word to the committee? And I think Mr. Slaughter would like a supplementary. Do you want to do that very quickly, because we are going to lose our quorum?
It was actually another question which I think was down there, which was about the national oversight mechanism. I think I can shortcut this because I think you probably are all in favour of a national oversight mechanism. But do you see that the independent public effort may have a role in doing their own blowing, where they don't feel that an inquiry has been properly executed in that way? I mean, that is a major flaw here, I think we will all agree, where you have good recommendations that don't get implemented. Do you think you should have a role in that? Or when decisions that are taken by inquiries, and I think all the way back to, for example, the Leveson inquiry for victims of press intrusion, that you could have a role in saying this is something that politicians may need to address, even if they don't find it convenient?
Short answer, yes. And I actually think we've got the ability to do that as the statute stands at the moment, to be able to draw those issues out and raise them where recommendations haven't been implemented, be able to raise systemic issues that are reoccurring over and over and over again. We have that ability now, and it's what I intend to do where we come across those instances. On the oversight mechanism, I fully support it. I'm in full support of it. At the moment, I think it is left to families and survivors in their grief when recommendations are not being fulfilled, when there's inertia. It's left to the families to have to fight for answers about whether recommendations have been implemented and to try and drive change. That's wrong.
Thank you very much. I think Lord Wills wants to
Well,
add
I also want to support it very enthusiastically, because everyone round this table has got their own examples of how things just drift on through Whitehall, ministers come and go, worthwhile recommendations just drift off into eternity, while the grieving, bereaved people wonder what has happened to stop the sort of thing that happened to their loved ones ever happening again. But it goes back to the question of resource. This actually requires significant resource. An oversight mechanism, and the IPA is an obvious vehicle for it, representing the bereaved, needs resource. It needs monitoring on a daily basis, monthly basis, and so on. It needs resource.
Thank you very much for that.
Could I, in that respect, say that I would support the existence of an independent oversight mechanism, and I'd urge you to listen to Deborah Coles from Inquest, who has been lobbying for this for decades.
Thank you. That's a very helpful footnote to add to those remarks. I draw the proceedings to a conclusion just with this thought, that this committee looked at the proposals for a Hillsborough law. We followed carefully what had been happening with the Hillsborough Now campaign and the families and the role that they had played with great admiration. We called witnesses before this committee, including Andy Burnham and Bishop James Jones, but Mr. Abrahamson gave evidence to us as well, and many other people too. We were able to play a very small part, but it was a part that was, I hope, helpful in that we recommended that we should go forward with some form of public accountability, and it included not just the duty of candour, but the things that have been talked about this afternoon on the level playing field, but also the need to engage and involve with those who are victims in the kinds of circumstances, Ms. Butts, that you have rightly alluded to today, and why we must never lose sight of those who have been often treated by institutions with utter contempt. It is the job of committees like this to try and push the margin, push it out, to try and bring about some kind of reasonable change. We do have legislation before Parliament at the moment. I hope that this committee is able swiftly to make some small contribution to that debate, and in doing so, we will very heavily rely on what you have said to us in evidence this afternoon. So with those words, I'd like to thank all three of you for coming, and with those words, say order, order, the proceedings now closed.